It's a big month of recruiting talk in Michigan, across the Big Ten and across the country. Please check out the videos that we provided discussing the Wolverines' recruiting weekends and what lies ahead for the rest of the month of June. We got Justin Rowe on the line from Stadium in Maine podcast, joins us on a regular basis to discuss the Maize and Blue. Justin, appreciate you stopping by as always today, and I'm fascinated. I just learned this a couple minutes ago from Justin, and this is a great, great topic, because what is being instituted on campus in the football facility at Michigan sounds somewhat familiar.
Yeah, so it's something that some people have said, why has this not been happening for a long time? And I know it goes back to the Brady Hoke days at Michigan, where he was very focused on Ohio State in that one game, and there was a countdown clock and all that stuff. And it went away with Rich Rod, and then Jim Harbaugh has never brought that countdown clock back. But it did surface in the past week or two that they had a little sign up or a little graphic up in the Michigan football facility saying, "What are you going to do to beat Ohio State today?" So at least they're bringing that back. I think it seems like, 7 years into Harbaugh's tenure, that he wants to focus on that game. And obviously we know that game has been his Achilles heel, among some other things. But at the end of the season, once Thanksgiving weekend comes about, Michigan has not been able to win that game under Harbaugh.
There are dozens of books out there. I've got a couple that chronicle the rivalry, so you can take it all the way back to the territory around Toledo and bloodbaths and fights and all sorts of stuff, because it is serious stuff from the beginning. But what really elevated it to a national stage where everybody knew about it, and it was arguably, if not without argument, the greatest rivalry in college football, was, of course, Bo versus Woody, and then it's had its various stages since then. I got to tell you, Justin, when I started working at ESPN, this was 2001, so this was coming off Michigan dominance. This was when Jim Tressel just first got the job. John Cooper went 2-10-1 against Michigan. I had Michigan fans that I first was introduced to then that minimized the Ohio State rivalry on the opposite end of the spectrum, basically saying we play Notre Dame, Michigan State, Ohio State every year. They're all three generally in the same ballpark. And I thought that was complete blasphemy. I just had never heard anything like that. I figured, as an Ohio State fan, Michigan is the game. It's just without question. I did recognize the Notre Dame and Michigan State games being very important to the Michigan fan, but I just figured, well, the Ohio State game's the Ohio State game. These two teams rule the league historically, but it's an interesting perspective. So what has been your perspective internally for you personally, but also from your friends and family growing up in this rivalry compared to the other Michigan rivalries?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is regional for these fans. I come from the west side of the state in Michigan, where all my friends growing up were Michigan State fans, and we were only an hour and a half or so from Notre Dame, from South Bend. So I think there was a bit more emphasis on those games just because we were, I was going to school with Michigan State and Notre Dame fans all the time, not so much Ohio State fans. So when I was growing up, I actually did, I put a little more emphasis on that Michigan State game and the Notre Dame game as well. And so I know that I have friends and family that are Michigan fans as well that felt the same. But since I've been on the east side of the state for the past 7-8 years, it's very different over here. And obviously I'm in Ann Arbor. I'm an hour from Toledo. And Toledo, I used to work for the Mud Hens down there, and it's like a half split. That's truly where it splits off. And so I think that the Michigan State-Michigan rivalry really sprung up in the from when Michigan State became, a player, a competitor in the Big Ten, as they hadn't been in a while. But, I think all in all, when you look at it from the full perspective, from when you were a kid, when you were, watching until, when I was a kid until now, it's always been Michigan, Ohio State. It has to be, right? That's the big one. Those other ones are big. Like you said, they're very important. You got to think about them. But I think there's a reason why it's the last game on the schedule each year, right? And so that's where I think everyone would say, oh, Michigan State's a big rivalry, Notre Dame's a big rivalry, Ohio State's the rival.
And again, from a national perspective, I know that I've traveled to certain parts of the country, also lived in other parts of the country. I covered the SEC for 7 years, and I was inundated with SEC football every week. But there were games, and this was during the late 90s, John Cooper's taking undefeated teams into Ann Arbor or in Columbus and losing. And that game would be the only game outside the SEC that people would be talking about. They would talk about Ohio State. It was all SEC all the time, but then they would bring up Ohio State and Michigan. It's just a national game, and it's nationally recognized more so than those other Michigan rivalries. At least that's my take on it based on my perspective and my experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, the timing of the game, it's in rivalry week is now what it's deemed. And so people start to look at that. And for a lot of time, let's be honest. I know that Michigan has been quote unquote dominated by Ohio State for the past, however many years you want to say, but you go back to 2016 and 2018, 2016, it's like, that was one of the games of the decade, probably. And so I think there have been really good games, and it has been must-see TV. You can go back to when Devin Gardner's team lost 42-41 on a failed 2-point conversion, and he was playing on a broken foot. It's always a game. I mean, honestly, Mark, in 2017, Michigan had John O'Korn at quarterback and still had a chance to win at the end of the game. So as much as people want to say, yes, Ohio State has dominated the rivalry and all that, it's always a game to tune in on. And I think that's for everybody. It always ends up being good football. There's true hatred. Now, that's where it takes us into what, Michigan's trying to do with not allowing red into the locker room, putting up, what are you going to do to beat Ohio State today? Something that Ohio State has put, they have the gold pants. They have the whole shrine towards the game. Is that hatred really there for Michigan or against Ohio State? Or is Ohio State just have it? They truly are working on it every single day of the year. And Michigan kind of sees it as like, it's just one more game on the schedule, as Jim Harbaugh has actually put it before.
Yeah, and just to go back to that John Cooper era, of course, he comes in from Arizona State, where he famously beat Michigan in the Rose Bowl, and one of the reasons why he got the Ohio State job, and then ironically couldn't beat Michigan but 2 times in 13 years. And then Jim Tressel, it's very similar to what you're talking about taking place in the Michigan complex. He hit this thing head on, and that's one of the reasons he became so popular. Of course, he had to deliver, which he did, but he gets the job. And one of the first things he says upon arrival is, you're going to be proud of our student athletes when they gain their degree, number one. Number two, in whatever the number of days, 320 days, he says this at an Ohio State basketball game when we go to Ann Arbor and beat Michigan. Well, that gets everybody fired up, and he delivers, and then he goes 9-1 against Michigan. And now it's kind of strange that Jim Harbaugh is a guy that on the field was successful as a player against Ohio State, won 2 huge games in 85 and 86. Yes. Maybe was he 3-0? No, I think he went 2-0. Yeah, 85 and 86. Ohio State won in 84, and Harbaugh was not the quarterback. Anyway, 85 and 86. I'll back myself up on this one, 27-17 and 26-24. That's how I've got it up here. So
wow. That's pretty dang good.
Yeah, I pretty fascinated by this game throughout the history of my life as well. So anyway, it is funny when Ohio State fans, really beat on Harbaugh because he does have the 2-0 record as a player against Ohio State, but it almost falls in place with what is kind of at least Michigan fans hope, is a reset for Harbaugh overall, and this is just kind of a slice of it.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point there. I think everybody has known Harbaugh, except for probably the last 2 years, as this ultra competitor, right? Ultra competitor, hates to lose more than he wants to win. I mean, there's stories out there about him and John Harbaugh still in their 40s and 50s playing hoops in the driveway and they go at it, and his dad's trying to call him in for Thanksgiving dinner and they're like, no, I can't come in, we're one more game. Like, that's the guy that we all know as Jim Harbaugh. So you'd have to think that maybe internally something to this effect has been going on in his 7 years, but maybe just the media hasn't blown it up, or a picture hasn't been taken. But I'd be hard pressed to find out that Jim Harbaugh is not truly serious about beating Ohio State. He may not have the mantra, and he may not go and make up gold pants, or do a shrine or something, but he's as Michigan football as it gets. So I don't know. There's a lot of people that have said over the years, in his 7 years, he doesn't take it seriously enough. He says it's just one more game. Well, I just the things that we know about Jim Harbaugh, it'd be hard to imagine that he doesn't care about that game. But I think I'll say this to end it. He may care internally, but he hasn't been great, it doesn't seem like, at getting the rest of the crew, the team, the program, everybody in that facility on board with that, and getting that ingrained in their minds and bodies as well.
Well, the rivalry does need a bit of a jump start. You can only produce so many hype videos, as my son tells me when we watch the game every year, and I'm all geeked up and ready for another. And he's kind of like, well, isn't Wisconsin and Michigan State, aren't they more Penn State rivals than? And I'm like, and he's like, that's ancient history to him in terms of when the series was competitive. But Ohio State and Michigan, and again, it's fascinating when you made the comment to me about there being comments on social media about Ohio State fans getting on Michigan fans about living rent-free in their heads. I responded by saying, what fascinates me is that after all this dominance on the scoreboard over the past 17 or 18 years, that truly Michigan still lives rent-free in Ohio State's heads. All you have to do is look at the facility on campus and hear the rhetoric. Shoot, I know Ohio State podcasts that devote a day to Michigan every week throughout the entire year. So Michigan, despite the lack of success on the field, is still chief nemesis for Ohio State. And it's hopefully will continue and be more competitive on down the line.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the big reasons for the dominance, right? And continued, because I think what happens a lot, and this happened, I think, for Michigan versus Michigan State, you think about Mike Hart saying they're the little brother. Well, then D'Antonio, brings that up. All of a sudden, Michigan kind of lets Michigan State takes a back seat in Michigan's head, and they're looking at different things. Well, all of a sudden, Michigan State then takes over that rivalry for a good decade. I think that's where Ohio State fans are so obsessed with Michigan that they're not going to let Michigan take a back seat in their mind and let something slip up and happen. Right. And I think that Harbaugh probably fueled that fire a little bit too, because, everybody, I remember back in 2014 and 15 when Harbaugh was hired, it was like, all right, this is it. I remember seeing tweets, Michigan's going to win a national title in the next 5 years. No doubt in my mind. Michigan's going to do this. They're going to beat Ohio State. Harbaugh's going to do it. That probably to Ohio State fans and to Urban Meyer and to all their coaches and staff and players said, hi, we're still here. We've been dominating for 15 years now. Why do you think that we're going to stop at any time soon? I don't care who Jim Harbaugh is. He's not going to do anything to us. We're going to continue to beat your ass. And so that's continued to happen. And I truly think that, that's been a heavy contributor to what happens. There was even a couple former Ohio State players on Twitter after this sign came about, and they said, yeah, I felt it on the field that I hated them and they didn't really hate me as much. So if players are saying it, it's got to be, there's some truth to that, right?